Hi again guys, and welcome to the very first car review for the 1.40 selection of cars, the 5 vehicles that we've had, and of course I gave my brief thoughts on all 5 of the vehicles in my overarching review for the whole update, and check that out if you haven't already. But the reason why I've opted to start reviewing these cars with the Red Bull first, which is not typically something I would do, I'd probably review, for instance, the Toyota Tundra first. The reason why I've done that is because this is such a controversial car, easily the most controversial car of the 5, because our expectations, especially those who actually were looking forward to it, because a lot of people weren't, and there were plenty of comments on the channel about people who did not care for the car at all, in a very similar way to the Vision GTs. This car, as I said, has been exactly that, very controversial, and the reason why is because of how it performs. Because on the surface of things, I made certain predictions about how I thought this car would be, and some of them were correct. In fact, I believe all of the actual predictions that I made were correct, because I didn't make that many. I made the prediction that having a V12 engine, I believe lower downforce is what we were told, that it would be more challenging, maybe slower around the track, more challenging and a little bit more realistic. That was exactly right, because it's exactly what this car is. However, the one thing that I certainly was not expecting was that it's this much slower. The top speed in particular, as I again mentioned in my overarching review, is a lot slower. 45 miles per hour or more separates this from the 2014. And on the subject of the 2014, let's be honest here, that's what this is. In fact, originally, when we first saw the competition version, it was called the X2014 Competition, so the X2019, don't let it fool you. The name is just an update, it's a gimmick. This is not some radically new thing like the X2014 was compared to the X2011. However, on that point of fan cars, a lot of people have been wondering, in conjunction with why is this one worse, also, why have we not seen a fan car yet in GT Sport? And I think that both of those things are actually due to the exact same reason. So hear me out here, because of course this is only a theory, but I believe it's a pretty sound one. And that is, I believe that the reason why they made this car at all, not just why they made it slower, but why they made it at all in the game, is the exact same reason why there is no fan car in the game, and why, and here's the bit that you might not like, I don't think there will be. I do not think we're going to get another Red Bull fan car in GT Sport. Now, I hope we're wrong, or I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think that that's going to happen. And the reason why is this. Esports is still a very new thing, and Polyphony, although having a lot of people on their side, doubtless have plenty of people who don't take it seriously. And if you go into esports events as they currently are, with major events and even some finals, with the best players in the world racing these ridiculously unrealistic Red Bull fan cars doing over 300 miles per hour, well, that would be about as useful for being taken seriously as having the World Finals in a Tomahawk X. Nobody would take it seriously. The players would love it because it would look so ridiculous, but nobody from a traditional racing background would even give it any kind of respect or, as I said, take it seriously at all. That's why I don't think we're going to see a fan car, because Kaz and Polyphony as a whole are trying to make it as legitimate as possible. That leads me into this car, because I think the reason why this is slower, the reason why it's more difficult to drive, the reason why the lap times are not as good, is the exact same thing. They are trying to make the Red Bull more grounded, more realistic, so that people take it more seriously. That's my reasoning, I could be wrong, but that is why I think this is the case. It's a car which, by making it worse, kind of counterintuitively makes it more realistic. Because a car like this should be challenging. It should be easy to lose grip. Look at a Formula car. It's pretty much the pinnacle of high-performance engineering, in terms of motorsport at least, and yet you can still spin up the tyres easy as anything. So of course a car like this should be challenging to drive, especially when it's not a hybrid, that's just pure 800 horsepower engine action at work. So yes, it should be challenging. The part that I don't agree with is having it so severely neutered for top speed. 200 is kind of ridiculous for a car with 800 horsepower. You could believe that with like a short ratio gearbox hill climb vehicle. Of course that would struggle to get up to those speeds, but this thing should not struggle at all. It's far more aerodynamic than it would ever really need to be to hit 200, even with downforce. So, especially when they themselves have set the precedent of making it so crazy fast, it's very jarring to experience that. And I know a lot of you guys have said, well, I don't really care about the top speed that much. Trust me, I don't think you've driven the car yet if you don't care, because as soon as you drive this on an open track, you'll care real fast, because it gets up to 200 so quickly, you will notice, because that lack of speed makes a huge difference to lap times at Le Mans, at the Nordschleife. Even on a track like Monza, you get to around 180, which is what I'm doing on this track, the Nordschleife, with the highest downforce. You get to it so quickly that it feels like you've got no top speed to work with at all. And it does affect lap times, because here on the Nordschleife, there should be no competition whatsoever between a Red Bull and an LMP car. That's kind of the point. LMPs are far from being the ultimate race cars. The Red Bull was designed for that sole purpose. So to have a car like this one, and of course I'm not the fastest of drivers, but even so, this should not even be close to LMP lap times, and yet it is. The lap time that I did that you can see here is roughly the same as many of the lap times that you guys can do, and even some of the ones that I can do aren't far off in actual LMP cars like the Porsche 919. That is more realistic, but it's very underwhelming, and the reason why it's underwhelming is because we were spoiled with the previous ones. So again, it's not the community's fault, it's Polyphony's fault for making the Red Bull so good, so OP, so ridiculously unrealistic before, that now this feels slow because in actual fact, it's more realistic. So that's my theory. That's why I think this car is the way it is. I think it's more challenging and slower in particular because they're trying to make it more realistic, more viable, and to garner more respect, to make it so it's not this crazy over-the-top Ridge Racer type thing. Look, for instance, as an example, on one of the recent community spotlight videos here on the channel, where, of course, as many of you know, I feature replays from many of you guys showing your skills. The single most popular episode of that series so far is a tomahawk going around the Nordschleife in 3.5 minutes. Many of the comments are discussing how ridiculously unrealistic that is. And the reality is, those are the exact same lap times that you'd be looking at in something like a Red Bull X2011, 2010, certainly the 2014 fan car. They cannot afford to have that kind of comment made when esports is already easily underestimated as a sport. Is it happening? Yes. But are there plenty of people who still need to be won over? For sure. And they don't want to make it harder for themselves. So that's my theory behind even the X2019. And in terms of how it does perform, I actually don't dislike the car. I just think it takes a massive amount of getting used to. Because once you do get used to it, it actually feels kind of cool to have a Red Bull that doesn't do all the work for you. It is more challenging, and when you first start driving it, it will annoy you, I guarantee, because sometimes you lose grip so easily it seems strange, and it happens randomly. But as you can see from my lap that I'm doing, which technically was my second lap after my practice lap, it's much better. The flow is much better, and the main piece of advice that I'd give you in terms of using this Red Bull is keep your average speed up. Regardless of how high the downforce setting is, you must try to keep this car going as quick as possible, because if you really slow down, for instance in a hairpin, and then have to power out of the corner, you will notice that severe drop in traction and downforce, far more so than you will in any other Red Bull. And that even goes for something like the Junior, which should technically be like the most realistic of them all. And even that has more grip than this does. So overall, that's it for my thoughts on the X2019. It will doubtless continue to be a very controversial car, but in a way, I understand what Polyphony's trying to do, at least as far as my own theory goes. If it's not according to that theory, well, then I would have a harder time understanding what they're trying to do, but at least if they're doing it for that reason, that would make sense to me. But overall, as I said, that's it for my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours down below, and I will be doing some tuning for this car as well, possibly even tomorrow on the channel. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.